I'm Lauren Glendavidian, and I work here at CCTV Center for Media and Democracy. And I'm very fortunate to serve on a special legislative committee looking at the future of public educational and government access centers, the community media centers, the 25 community media centers all across the state that open the doors of local government, provide lifelong learning, and create a center of media education and community building that is really important as we weave our community together and our state together. And these channels have been operating since 1984 all across the state. And as you probably know, perhaps as a cable TV viewer or not, but cable television revenue is declining, and that is what public educational and government access channels depend on for funding. Even though cable companies are also in the internet business, which doesn't have the same kind of public interest give back or contribution as cable television does. And we have been able to work with the legislature to create a committee to look into this question of the future of funding for PEG access in community media. And it's a really interesting group of people. You can watch all of the meetings. We have them here at CCTV or online at ORCA. And the committee includes Senator Becca Balint and Representative Michael Yantachka, who are the chair and co-chair, Dan Glanville, who is the Comcast representative representing all the cable operators in the state, Karen Horn from the League of Cities and Towns, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, Andrea Papetti, who is with the Public Utility Commission, and Clay Purvis, who is with the Department of Public Service, and myself. So we have had a series of meetings to look at alternative ways to think about funding the public benefits that come from the cable company's use of our public property to run the cable company. And that's what PEG is used to, those resources are used to fund public benefit. In much the same way that telephone companies give back in the form of universal service and services for the hard of hearing and 911 services. So cable has public benefits connected to it, and telephone has public benefits connected to it. But what's interesting is the internet, which is a different category, doesn't have public benefits connected to it. So even though private companies are using public rights of way to run the internet, which in some cases is exactly the same as the phone network or the cable network, there is no federal or state requirement that there be a percentage of that revenue set aside for public purposes in some form, either through connection charges or use taxes, which is what the PEG fee on the cable bill is. So what makes it really interesting is that a federal court of appeals, the DC Court of Appeals, just handed down a ruling in the last couple days that have to do with the state's ability and authority to collect a public benefit from commercial internet providers that are using rights of way of the state. And this is a case called Mozilla versus the FCC, and it's a really important case. It's known as a net neutrality case because Mozilla and many friends of the court and co-petitioners filed a case against FCC's reclassification of the internet from a Title II to a Title I. And you know, whenever I hear these titles, I get quite confused. So I made a little chart that might be useful, and it recaps what I was just saying, which is cable has public educational and government access requirements. It's Title VI. Telecom companies have universal service and 911 requirements. But the FCC reclassified the internet from telecom to Title I information service, which is a kind of a made-up, it's not a made-up category actually, it dates back to the 50s, but it is being used to apply to internet providers as if they are a kind of publisher of content. And there are no public interest requirements here. And in fact, there's a federal law, the Internet Tax Freedom Act, which really limits the authority of states to generate any revenue from the internet. However, this case is really important because the DC Court of Appeals said, we think the net neutrality ruling should hold, and we're not going to argue about whether it should be Title I or Title II. They basically say that this litigation has gone back and forth, and we decline yet again to flick the on-off switch of common carrier regulation under these circumstances. So they don't want to rule on that. But they do think that the FCC overstepped in prohibiting states like Vermont from setting their own kinds of net neutrality and broadband reinvestment rules. And they say here, but because the Commission's preemption directive lies beyond its authority, the FCC overreached, we vacate the portion of the 2018 order, the net neutrality order, purporting to preempt any state or local requirements that are inconsistent with the FCC's deregulatory approach. That opens the door for states like Vermont to try and even out this regulatory imbalance where the internet, the companies that are providing internet, are not making any compensation back for the use of public rights of way. So this is a really important moment, and I wanted to just tie this recent decision by the DC Federal Court in with the work that we're doing across the state and all your community media centers to make sure that the doors of opportunity and media education and community building remain open, and for us to find a diversified way of funding this work based on commercial use of the public rights of way, just like universal service should be funded, and 911 and all the important public benefits that come from the use of this network. And we're working hard to ensure that, and also to find other sources of revenue to continue to support this community resource. If you have any questions about this, feel free to contact me, Lauren Glenn Davidian, davidian@cctv.org, or my close colleagues at Vermont Access Network, including our president, Kevin Christopher. And thanks so much for watching and for your support of free speech, open networks, and open government.